How did the longest empire in the history of humanity fall? Welcome to Collapse, where giants fall. Today, we are going to explore the last hours of a millennial giant, an empire born from the ashes of Rome, which spanned the ages, survived invasions, crusades, epidemics, and time itself. Byzantium, a name filled with glory, faith, imperial splendor, and secrets. Its golden domes once dominated the seas, its diplomats wove the alliances of Europe, and its capital, Constantinople, shone like a beacon between East and West. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire defied predictions, pushing back wave after wave of threats. But no empire is eternal. What really happened? But before we set off on a new adventure, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to not miss anything. Thank you, and enjoy the journey. At the beginning of the 4th century, the Roman Empire is vast, but its unity is already weakened by military, political, and religious changes. The year 330 marks a turning point with the founding of Constantinople, the new Rome, on the ancient Greek site of Byzantium. This moment, though little perceived as crucial at the time, will profoundly redefine the Mediterranean world and beyond. To understand this turning point, it is essential to consider the regional powers that shape history, culture, and commercial exchanges across various continents. In Rome, the Constantinian dynasty learns from many crises. Since the end of the 3rd century, the state has experienced civil wars and administrative reforms. Emperor Diocletian, reigned 284 to 305, had established the Tetrarchy to stabilize the empire. However, internal rivalries resurface, and Constantine I, known as the Great, emerges as a legitimate leader after his victory at the Milvian Bridge in 312. In 324, he triumphs over Licinius and centralizes his power. His project, to move the nerve center of Rome to the east, where Persian and Gothic threats require a stronger presence. In 330, this project is realized with the founding of Constantinople, imperial capital. The empire remains unified under Constantine until his death in 337, but internal divisions resurface, foreshadowing the separation between West and East. Meanwhile, the Sassanid dynasty, which has ruled Persia since 224, strengthens its power. Emperor Shapur II, who ascends to the throne around 309, is a young ruler determined to consolidate his authority. Relations with Rome, at times peaceful and at other times hostile, are marked by a growing rivalry. In 330, both the Roman and Persian empires prepare to confront each other, each asserting its civilization as the most accomplished. Constantinople, as the new capital, symbolizes this competition between Rome, reinvented, and the proud Sassanid Persia, with its Zoroastrian tradition and Achaemenid legacy. On the Indian subcontinent, the Gupta dynasty reaches its peak, often considered a golden age for culture and the arts. Chandragupta I ascends to the throne around 320, marking the beginning of a period of prosperity. By 330, the empire reaches significant stability and exceptional intellectual and artistic refinement. Sanskrit literature flourishes, mathematics progresses, and Indian scholars codify a wealth of astronomical knowledge. The Gupta economy is thriving, supported by well-managed agriculture and a trade network connecting India to the ports of the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. This prosperity, although slightly disrupted by some border tensions, causes Gupta culture to radiate across a vast territory. In China, after the fall of the Han dynasty in 220 Anno Domini, the country is divided, with the eastern Jin in the south of the Yangtze River, and the north fragmented into so-called barbarian kingdoms, marking the beginning of the 16 Kingdoms period from 304 to 439. Although these upheavals seem far away, they affect crucial trade routes, notably those connecting China to Roman and Persian markets via Central Asia. In 330, the Jin imperial court is retracted to Jinkang, present-day Nanjing, while the north is fragmented into rival principalities, influencing the stability of caravan routes. In Africa, the Kingdom of Aksum on the Ethiopian plateau is experiencing significant expansion. Although Christianity will not be officially adopted until a bit later, Christian communities are likely present as early as 330, influenced by maritime exchanges. Aksum is notable for its commercial power, engaging in trade of ivory, spices, and gold. However, the region faces competition from Arab populations and Roman presence in Egypt. To the north, the Meroitic Nubia, heir to the Kingdom of Kush, is in decline. This ancient civilization, thriving through iron metallurgy and trade with Egypt, sees its power diminish in the 4th century, giving way to other Nubian entities. On the other side of the Atlantic, cities like Teotihuacan are developing, although the Mediterranean world remains unaware of it. Located northeast of present-day Mexico City, Teotihuacan reaches its peak between the 2nd and 6th centuries. Around 330, the city benefits from great power thanks to its trade network extending from the Maya Basin to the western regions of Mexico. Its temples, such as the pyramids of the sun and moon, bear witness to a centralized political organization and a rich religious culture. In Mesoamerica, pre-classical Maya cultures continue to develop, laying the foundations for future civilization, with city-states, social hierarchies, stone architecture, and complex ritual practices. The year 330 also marks a turning point for these American societies that will flourish further. Although these civilizations do not communicate as they do today, a network of silk roads and maritime routes already connects east and west. Since the 2nd century before Christ, Chinese silk has been reaching the Roman Empire via Central Asia. In 330, this trade continues to prosper, enriched with new valuable goods such as spices from Southeast Asia. Egyptian wheat, essential for the subsistence of Mediterranean cities, remains a major strategic issue. Gold from Africa, notably through the Kingdom of Aksum, also circulates in these global exchanges. Trade occurs through caravans, rivers, and maritime routes, connecting the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Mediterranean. When Constantine founds Constantinople in 330, he places it at a strategic crossroads, facing the west, but also the major trade routes linking Syria, Egypt, and Anatolia. The term Byzantine, used to refer to the Eastern Roman Empire, comes from the ancient city of Byzantium, founded in the 7th century before Christ by King Byzas. With the founding of Constantinople in 330, Constantine creates a new Rome, a political, military, and cultural legacy of Rome. The administrative elites, Roman law, and the rising Christian religion are established there. At the time, contemporaries referred to themselves as Romaion, and considered themselves the direct heirs of Rome. It is only during the Renaissance, with the research of humanists, that the term Byzantine is used to designate this empire that remains in the Roman continuity. In 330, Constantinople is not yet a fully distinct imperial capital, but rather an eastern extension of ancient, transforming Rome. The empire remains unified, and Constantine, by naming the city Constantinopolis, seeks to adapt Rome to his imperial projects and defensive priorities. The Roman Empire, faced with threats on its borders, wars against the Persians, and Germanic incursions, needs a better protected capital, close to the conflict zones. The choice of Byzantium, a fortified city on the Bosphorus, is strategic. A sheltered harbor, natural ramparts, and direct access to Asia Minor are essential for the state's survival. Under Constantine and his successors, imperial authority is maintained in continuity with Roman institutions while adapting to regional specificities. Christianity, tolerated since the Edict of Milan, 313, takes on an increasingly prominent role in imperial politics. In 330, it transitions from a persecuted religion to a spiritual force supported by the emperor, profoundly influencing the culture, art, and architecture of the city. However, for the people, the new Rome remains primarily a project to maintain the greatness of the empire, with an increasingly Hellenistic cultural emphasis due to its geographical situation. In the year 330, caravans from Central Asia, merchants from Alexandria, and Roman officials come to Constantinople, as the emperor and his advisors consider making this city the guardian of Roman destiny. It becomes a link between Europe and Asia, and a strategic point for monitoring the Danube to the north and the passages to Syria and Egypt to the south. The city's fortifications are strengthened, and new Christian buildings, forms, baths, commemorative columns, and a hippodrome are added to the traditional monuments. The transfer of the capital does not imply the abandonment of Rome, but Constantinople now embodies the modernity of an empire that is both Roman and rooted in a key area. Why do we continue to differentiate between Rome and Byzantium and imagine two distinct empires? This is because Byzantium will eventually forge a unique destiny, combining Roman heritage, Greek tradition, and state Christianity. In 330, this separation is not yet formalized. The Romans of the time speak neither of partition nor of a Byzantine identity different from the Roman identity. For them, the empire remains a unified bloc, governed by a single emperor, and Constantinople is merely a new capital, intended to continue the glory of Rome. The term Byzantine will only be used by historians starting in the 16th century to designate this entity with specific linguistic, cultural, and political characteristics. The year 330 marks a turning point for the Mediterranean world. Roman unity still officially persists, even if fractures are beginning to emerge. Persian rivals are closely monitoring this strategic reorganization, while in India, under the Gupta dynasty, a cultural effervescence is taking place. In China, the Eastern Jin dynasty maintains a fragile order in the south, while the north enters a tumultuous period of the 16 kingdoms of barbarians. In Africa, Aksum is strengthening and Meroitic Nubia is declining. On the other side of the Atlantic, Teotihuacan dominates Mesoamerica, and Maya cultures are beginning to rise. Constantine founds Constantinople, highlighting the importance of this crossroads of exchange between Europe, Asia, and Africa, already signaling a form of ancient globalization. It is in this geopolitical mosaic that the Byzantine era will be born, even if this term does not yet exist in 330. There is simply Rome, its transformation, and Byzantium, the new Rome, a founding milestone between the Roman Empire and its eastern heir. Constantine, born around 272 or 273 Anno Domini, died in 337, is one of the most significant emperors in Roman history. In the early 4th century, he undertakes major reforms and relocates the center of the empire to the east. In 330, he founds a new Rome on the site of Byzantium, marking the beginning of a transformation of the Roman Empire. Rome, although the traditional heart of the empire, was gradually losing its influence in the face of invasions, economic troubles, and internal rivalries, while the East, wealthier and more urbanized, became increasingly strategic. Constantine chooses Byzantium for its exceptional geographical position at the crossroads of Europe and Asia on the Bosphorus Strait. This control allows for mastery over essential trade flows between Central Asia, the Near East, and Europe, and protects the empire from maritime invasions. The city of Byzantium, already equipped with strong walls, is perfectly suited for defense. Before Constantine, these walls had been maintained, offering a view of naval movements and protection against a prolonged siege. The port of Prosphorion, located in a natural harbor, is a major strategic asset. This port allows the city to become a naval base and a commercial platform. Constantine strengthens the fortifications, repurposing stone blocks to limit costs and speed up construction. These walls, already strong during his reign, will play a key role during future sieges. Alongside this foundation, Constantine implements administrative reforms to centralize power and improve the efficiency of administration. Inheriting the system of tetrarchy established by Diocletian, he reorganizes the dioceses and creates prefectures to oversee the major regions of the empire. These reforms aim to simplify the management of the provinces while maintaining some local flexibility, thereby facilitating tax collection and troop levies. At the heart of Constantine's project, the official Christianization of the empire constitutes a decisive religious shift. Although often presented as the one who imposed Christianity, the reality is more nuanced. In 313, the Edict of Milan, proclaimed by Constantine and Licinius, granted freedom of worship to Christians. However, it is the Council of Nicaea, convened in 325, that marks the emperor's desire to unify Christianity around a common doctrine. At that time, disputes were tearing Christians apart over the nature of Christ, particularly between Arianism, which holds that the Son is of a different essence than the Father, and those asserting their co-equality. Constantine, concerned about the unity of the empire, wishes to end these quarrels to ensure ideological cohesion. The council resulted in the first great Christian creed, affirming the consubstantiality of the Father and the Son and condemning Arianism. Although this decision did not immediately eliminate all divergences, it marked a firm imperial support for Christianity. After this council, Constantine accelerates the construction of churches and grants privileges to the clergy. Although he does not instantly transform Roman society, which remains predominantly pagan, his actions pave the way for a gradual transformation. The elites see adherence to the new faith as a political asset. Quickly, Christianity acquires a privileged status. Large basilicas are erected, the Christian liturgy permeates the imperial court, and the role of the bishop grows even in civil affairs. This evolution shapes the identity of Constantinople, which becomes both a political New Rome and a bastion of Christianity. The Hippodrome of Constantinople becomes a landmark, a vast stadium dedicated to chariot races and other popular festivities. These events are of great importance, blending sporting excitement with political stakes, as the factions, blues, greens, reds, whites, serve both as sports groups and political supporters. The Hippodrome thus becomes a venue for social and political demonstrations, where the emperor appears before the people. Constantine wishes to enhance this edifice, and to achieve this, he has a colossal statue of the Quadriga, the work of Lysippus, transported from Delphi. This gesture, combining political propaganda and cultural symbolism, aims to demonstrate that Constantine is both the heir and protector of the great Greek tradition. This statue was meant to impress visitors to the city. The Quadriga of Lysippus is just one of the many masterpieces transferred to Constantinople. To beautify his new capital, Constantine and his successors bring columns, statues, and works of art from the prestigious provinces of the empire, including Rome. Among these works, marble columns and statues of emperors or gods are displayed in urban spaces, symbols of imperial power. For Constantine, these ancient treasures legitimize his city as the new center of the Roman world, while perpetuating the Greco-Roman tradition, now tinged with Christianity. It is about reinterpreting the Roman heritage to adapt it to a Christian era, far removed from the pressures of the Western frontiers. In 337, Constantine dies near Nicomedia after campaigns or inspections. Some sources indicate that he was baptized on his deathbed, a symbolic gesture given that he had, until then, been seen as favorable to Christianity without being officially so. His death leads to immediate troubles. The empire remains fragile, with dynastic tensions and a vast territorial expanse. Constantine leaves several sons, each wishing to exercise authority over different parts of the empire. Succession struggles, common at the time, begin among his sons, Constantine II, Constans, and Constantius II. Each inherits a portion of the empire, with distinct capitals or command centers. This partition does not resolve the conflicts of power, and quickly, the brothers fight. Court intrigues, supported by military and administrative factions, fuel personal ambitions. These rivalries weaken the imperial unity that Constantine had worked to maintain, at least on ideological and religious levels. At the same time, external pressures, notably from barbarian peoples, are felt. To the north of the Danube, the Goths, a Germanic Scythian people, become a serious threat. Divided into several branches, such as the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths, they seek new territories and clash with Roman power. Many of them already know the empire through commerce or military service. When they perceive the empire weakened by internal conflicts, some Gothic leaders cross the borders to attack. The Roman East, now centered on Constantinople, finds itself on the front line facing the Goths and other northern peoples. Although the city is further away from the Danube limes than Rome, the need to maintain an army in the Balkans increases. The military campaigns conducted by the emperors to counter these incursions are often difficult. Constantius II, the sole sovereign of the Constantinian branch, after the disappearance of his brothers, must manage the defense against the Sassanid Persians while consolidating the Balkans against the Goths. The fiscal resources of the East, richer, are crucial to finance these expeditions. Between the founding of Constantinople in 330 and the end of the Ivoirist century, Constantine laid fundamental administrative foundations to distinguish the Roman Empire of the East from that of the West. Although the term Byzantine only appears today, the successors of Constantine begin an administrative and cultural evolution unique to the East. The Greek language gains legitimacy within the state, and a literate aristocracy, influenced by Greek culture and supported by a Christian imperial court, emerges. The rise of the Goths at the end of the IV century, however, demonstrates the empire's fragility. When they cross the Danube, fleeing from other peoples or seeking better lands, they confront the Roman authorities who attempt both negotiation and confrontation. Tensions will explode later, influencing the future of both the Eastern and Western empires. However, between 330 and 395, The main achievement remains the consolidation of Constantinople as an urban and political center on the Bosporus, bringing stability and economic prosperity through the control of trade routes. By the end of the IV century, Constantinople becomes a true imperial capital. Although the city is still under construction, it offers numerous promises. Infrastructures are developing, and emperors erect churches and civic monuments there. The imperial administration settles in durably, and influential Roman senators come there, establishing their villas while maintaining their possessions elsewhere. After Constantine's death in 337, his momentum for the city continues. The pressure from the Goths and administrative centralization increased the importance of the East within the empire. The Christian religion, now central to governance, strengthens Constantinople's position, attracting architects, jurists, and scholars. However, this rise in power stirs jealousy in Rome, where some view the loss of prestige for the imperial city unfavorably. In 395, with the division of the empire, Constantine's choice of Byzantium becomes decisive. It allows for the survival of the Roman state in a new form, thanks to the administrative structures he put in place. The official conversion to Christianity, reinforced by the Council of Nicaea in 325, transforms society and gives the emperor the support of the church, essential to maintaining the unity of the empire. Meanwhile, the Goths, aware of the empire's wealth, exert constant pressure. Their rise translates into alliances and confrontations. Sometimes integrated as federates, sometimes fought against, they destabilize the empire. After 337, and until the end of the century, magistrates in Constantinople juggle between diplomacy and sending armies along the Danube. This situation heralds a strategic change. The defense of northern borders now requires fortified posts, subtle alliances, and solid logistical support, facilitated by the wealth of the East. The period from 330 to 395 marks a major turning point. The unified Roman Empire still exists theoretically, but the reforms of Constantine, continued by his heirs, establish an imperial center sheltered from the massive invasions that will ravage the West. By renaming Byzantium to Constantinople, he paves the way for the Byzantine Empire. The port of Prosphorion, the hippodrome, the administrative organization, and the Christianization initiated by the Council of Nicaea lay the foundations of the new Rome. At the death of Constantine in 337, his sons dispute the inheritance, but the city, the faith, and the structures created by Constantine ensure the stability of the Eastern Empire. The Goths, still to the north, represent a growing threat, meaning the empire will soon have to adjust its military and diplomatic priorities. However, Constantine's vision endures. Constantinople, protected by its walls and strengthened by its religious radiance, will continue to develop, ensuring the longevity of the Roman ideal in the Eastern Mediterranean. In the year 395, the death of Emperor Theodosius I marks the official separation of the Roman Empire. The East is entrusted to his son Arcadius, and the West to his brother Honorius. Although the division is official, political and cultural ties remain. The elites of Constantinople are tasked with maintaining Roman power while facing military pressures on their eastern and Danubian borders. Arcadius, criticized for his lack of military experience, relies on powerful advisors. His reign is marked by the consolidation of the bureaucracy, with eastern prefectures and dioceses facilitating the management of the provinces in the face of Gothic invasions and internal rivalries. The court of Constantinople thus becomes more resilient. At the beginning of the 5th century, the security of Constantinople becomes crucial. Under Theodosius the city is equipped with the walls of Theodosius, built between 413 and 447, which withstand even Attila in 447. These fortifications ensure the security of the capital and reinforce its strategic role. In 438, the Codex Theodosianus unifies imperial law, reflecting the Christianization of institutions and facilitating administration. The Greek language, although Latin remains the legislative language, gains importance in the Eastern Empire, creating a distinct cultural identity. Greek culture, already deeply rooted in the Eastern Mediterranean since the Hellenistic period, naturally blends with the administrative needs of Constantinople. High officials and imperial jurists prefer to draft and promulgate their texts in Greek, especially in provinces where the population predominantly speaks Greek, such as in Asia Minor, the Levant, or the Aegean. The Greek language thus becomes the identity of the Eastern Empire, marking a cultural evolution distinct from the West, which remains attached to Latin and Roman traditions. This linguistic transition initiates a lasting fracture between the two spheres, religious and political, which will profoundly influence medieval history. Imperial dominance over Egypt, vital for grain supply, is threatened during this period of turmoil. Although Egypt remains under the authority of Constantinople, internal conflicts and the emergence of rival powers weaken this tutelage. Some sources mention a reorganization that shifts the control of Egypt's supply to Illyricum, closer to the Balkans. Moreover, the region of Isauria in southern Anatolia faces repeated revolts from its population, known for its rebellious spirit. The empire must deploy significant military resources to maintain order and prevent the fragmentation of its authority. This geographical reorganization is also linked to significant economic issues. Egypt, the empire's granary, ensures the stability of Constantinople and the major cities of the Levant. When its control is weakened, the empire seeks new production areas, particularly in Illyricum, in the southwestern Balkans. This redistribution affects the caravans and ships from the east, while imperial officials attempt to prevent shortages. These adjustments foreshadow future upheavals, especially during the Arab expansion and the loss of Egypt. As the 5th century progresses, the Western Roman Empire deteriorates in the face of barbarian invasions. In 476, General Odoacer overthrows the last emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, and takes control of Italy. In Constantinople, Emperor Zeno, of Isaurian origin and faced with internal uprisings, seeks a diplomatic solution to avoid confrontation with Odoacer. He calls upon the Ostrogoths, led by Theodoric, to contain Odoacer. The latter is invited to come to Italy to subdue or eliminate his rival, while acknowledging the nominal supremacy of Constantinople. A compromise is established. Theodoric governs Italy as the king of the Ostrogoths, but theoretically recognizes the authority of the Eastern Emperor. This situation reflects the new reality. Constantinople, although unable to immediately reconquer the lost territories, seeks to maintain its symbolic legitimacy over the former Western provinces. For Zeno, the task of governing is arduous, as he must contend with the legacy of dynastic struggles. A rival, Basiliscus, briefly attempts to seize the throne, plunging the court of Constantinople into a civil war. Although Zeno ultimately prevails, internal divisions, border instability, and the boldness of certain tribal leaders constantly challenge his sovereignty. His Isaurian origins, although useful for managing this turbulent region, elicit suspicion from the Constantinopolitan elites, who are attached to Roman traditions and hostile to the Isaurians. The balance remains precarious. but Zeno's ability to navigate military, diplomatic, and dynastic landscapes affords him some successes against the threats. The death of Zeno in 491 paves the way for Anastasius III, whose reign marks a relative stabilization of the Eastern Empire. Gifted in administration, Anastasius undertakes monetary reforms that consolidate imperial finances and strengthen the value of the follies. His concern for reviving the economy is also reflected in tax simplification, which boosts agriculture and trade. Despite this, he must confront the religious dissent caused by monophysitism, influential in Egypt and Syria, and by the growing split between the churches of the East and the West. He also erects the Long Wall near Constantinople to protect Thrace from Balkan invasions. These defensive efforts reflect the growing desire for autonomy of the empire, even though the idea of a unified imperial reconquest remains theoretical. Anastasius passes away in 518 without a direct heir. Justin, an officer of Illyrian origin, rises through the ranks of the army through loyalty and competence. Born into a modest rural background, he leverages the support of the palace guard, which he commands, to assert his claims to the throne. His ascendance surprises the great aristocrats, as he comes from no imperial lineage. However, he has a major asset: his popularity with the troops and a segment of the populace, weary of palace intrigues. From the outset of his reign, Justin asserts himself as a protector of religious orthodoxy, breaking with Anastasius's monophysite compromises. This policy improves his relations with the Church of Rome and further distances the Eastern Empire from a more nuanced religious tradition. Under Justin III, a new generation of imperial officials, more military than administrative, aims to restore an offensive shine to the Eastern Empire, yet resources remain limited after decades of crises, border wars, and diplomatic compromises. In the Balkans, the threat posed by the Avars and Slavs looms, while in the East, the Sassanid rival remains a menace. Aware of the importance of alliances, Justin seeks to maintain peace through temporary agreements and strengthens fortifications in Anatolia and Syria. This defensive policy aims to contain incursions and revive the regional economy. He also encourages the construction or restoration of churches and the dissemination of orthodoxy, providing the dynasty with spiritual support. His reign, though brief, creates a stable environment for his nephew Justinian, ready to leave a lasting mark on Byzantine history. Despite his modest origins, Justin asserts his authority by surrounding himself with advisors from traditional nobility and loyal ex-military personnel. His government remains cautious. He avoids offensives, favors treaties with neighboring peoples, and relies on measured diplomacy to contain external ambitions. This strategy allows the empire to slowly restructure after the upheavals of the 5th century. Justin also cares for the imperial image, enhances solemn symbols, and maintains a complex court hierarchy. Urban elites benefit from this stability, regaining a certain prosperity, while the idea of a unified imperial destiny persists in official discourse. In 527, at his death, Justin leaves his nephew Justinian an empire in convalescence, more peaceful than after the passing of Theodosius III. The successive crises, Gothic invasions, Isaurian revolts, Hun threats, diplomatic tensions, have forged a more adaptable administration and army. The walls of Theodosius II still stand, the Codex Theodosianus remains the legal foundation, and the Greek language asserts itself as a cultural vehicle. The imperial legitimacy, defended by Zeno, now passes to a sovereign ready to realize an old dream, to restore the grandeur of Rome through the Justinian Renovatio Imperii. This period of crises and survival gives way to an imperial resurgence. When Justinian ascends to the throne in 527, the Eastern Roman Empire emerges from several decades of instability, border conflicts, and internal upheaval. Born into a modest family in Illyria, he owes his rise to his uncle Justin I, who adopts him and propels him into the highest positions. Driven by a strong Christian faith and the idealized memory of Rome, he embodies the idea of renovatio imperii, the restoration of the empire. His goal is to restore the brilliance of the eastern territories and reclaim the provinces lost in the west. His momentum is supported by the Senate of Constantinople and by his wife, Empress Theodora, an influential figure in politics and religion. Together, they are poised to profoundly alter the Mediterranean history, law, and architecture. From the beginning of his reign, Justinian entrusts the army to his general Belisarius, a brilliant strategist and diplomat. The priority is the reconquest of the Vandal kingdom in North Africa, a rich region once Roman. In 533, Belisarius lands, wins several victories, including the one at Ad Decimum near Carthage. King Gelimer is quickly defeated. Constantinople thus regains agricultural lands, control of the Western Mediterranean, and symbolic prestige. Welcomed as liberators, the Byzantine troops must still pacify the region. Proud of this success, Justinian turns his ambitions toward Italy, controlled by the Ostrogoths. After the death of Theodoric in 526, the kingdom is weakened by internal struggles. Justinian launches a campaign in 535, again led by Belisarius. He takes Sicily, moves toward Naples, Rome, then Ravenna. Despite these swift victories, Gothic resistance continues under new leaders, prolonging the fighting. Italy is ravaged, sieges, destruction, civilian suffering. However, Justinian rejoices to see the imperial flag flying over Rome. In his desire to reaffirm imperial presence beyond the Mediterranean, Justinian pushes his offensives, including the partial reconquest of southern Spain, once under the rule of the Visigoths. Although it is only a coastal fringe, this acquisition remains crucial for imperial prestige and the attempt to reconstitute the Mare Nostrum. However, he soon realizes that restoring the former Western Empire requires enormous resources, and that Belisarius's victories are just a step. In addition to costly armies, local resistances must be managed, ravaged provinces reorganized, and a coherent command structure maintained. Despite these obstacles, Justinian remains convinced that his expansionist policy is essential to restore the glory of Rome and unify its subjects. Military triumph is just one aspect of the era of Justinian. Passionate about architecture, he undertakes a vast construction program in Constantinople, culminating with the creation of Hagia Sophia, in replacement of the basilica destroyed during the Nika riots in 532. This uprising, born out of a conflict in the Hippodrome, threatens to overthrow Justinian. After a bloody crackdown, the emperor responds with a symbolic act by building an exceptional religious edifice. From 532 to 537, under the direction of the architects Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus, the basilica, with its imposing dome, becomes a masterpiece of engineering, whose interior light amazes. According to tradition, at the dedication, Justinian is said to have exclaimed, "O Solomon, I have surpassed you," comparing his work to the Temple of Jerusalem. Alongside these architectural projects, Justinian works to unify and organize Roman law. Due to the contradictions between the laws and the linguistic diversity, he appoints Tribonian to lead a commission tasked with revising and codifying legal texts. This results in the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Code of Justinian, completed in several stages starting from 529. It comprises 4 parts: the Codex, the Digest, the Institutes, and the Novelles. This code lays the foundations for a legal tradition influencing medieval Europe and, later, modern civil codes. Through this work, Justinian aims to assert imperial authority while ensuring the stability of society through clear legal norms. While the Byzantine Empire appears to shine brightly, the reality remains contrasting. In 541, a formidable plague arises, the Plague of Justinian. According to most sources, it likely begins in Egypt and spreads throughout the Mediterranean basin, quickly reaching Constantinople due to commercial exchanges that fuel the capital. This epidemic, possibly the first documented manifestation of bubonic plague, strikes the population indiscriminately across classes and ranks. Historical estimates suggest a mortality rate between 25 and 50% in certain regions of the empire. Entire cities become partially emptied of their inhabitants, and the countryside, already weakened by pillaging or army requisitions, struggles to meet wheat needs. In Constantinople, the situation is so critical that historians describe corpses littering the streets. The sanitation services, overwhelmed, can no longer bury the dead. The emperor himself falls ill but survives. His health, however, would remain fragile thereafter, influencing some subsequent political decisions. The cumulative effect of this pandemic is considerable: economic collapse, depopulation, labor shortages, and increased tax pressure to compensate for losses in state coffers. Justinian wanted to reconstitute a large part of the Roman Empire, but the plague and excessive military expenditures hinder his ambitions. The costs of campaigns, salaries supply, fortification repairs are enormous, and the treasury struggles to cope, especially with the decline in tax revenues caused by the epidemic. To make up for the loss of taxpayers, new taxes are imposed, creating a tense social climate. In Italy, the war against the Goths stagnates. Their resistance, especially in the north, and the ravages of war and plague, nullify several years of reconstruction. The imperial armies are also redeployed in response to eastern threats, notably against the Sassanid Empire, which slows Justinian's ambitious vision. Despite everything, Justinian pursues his dynamic policies. He sends officials to reorganize local administration and ensures religious orthodoxy by supporting the establishment of Chalcedonian Christianity. Christian monuments multiply in the reconquered territories, but the war in Italy becomes almost permanent. Initially, victorious campaigns begin to exhaust over time. Officers complain about a lack of reinforcements, and Constantinople's bureaucracy demands detailed reports to justify expenditures. In Africa, Berber and Vandal uprisings require occasional interventions. The trained imperial troops must face guerrilla operations, further straining finances. Justin, energetic and determined, also invests himself in the religious sphere. He seeks to unify the imperial doctrine and resolve theological conflicts. Although he is a supporter of the Council of Chalcedon, he attempts to accommodate the monophysite factions of the East, with compromises that sometimes exacerbate tensions among the patriarchs. Faith becomes an identity cement, justifying conquests and legitimizing his power. He supports the construction of churches and monasteries, grants to the clergy, and values the religious education of the elites, but marginalizes communities outside of imperial obedience, notably in Nubia, Ethiopia, or the Near East. Justin dies on November 14, 565, after an exceptionally long reign. His empire, seemingly triumphant, is in reality weakened. The regions conquered at great cost are vulnerable. Conflicts with the Goths in Italy are not completely resolved, although Ravenna and Rome remain under Byzantine control. New threats arise in the east, where the Sassanids seek to reconquer frontier territories. Africa, reconquered after the victory against the Vandals, requires strict administration to stabilize the region and restore agricultural prosperity. The Spanish part, under imperial control, remains marginal and vulnerable to incursions. The public treasury, depleted by war expenses and the plague, is not sufficient to support a strong military presence everywhere. In the provinces, some doubt the imperial state's ability to maintain the illusion of a unified Roman Empire. At Justin's death, his nephew Justin II ascends to the throne, inheriting a colossal task: financing armies spread across 3 continents while succeeding an omnipresent sovereign. Byzantine historians will wonder what General Belisarius's victories would have accomplished without the plague, or if Justinian's economic rigor did not weaken the empire. Justinian's reign ends with a mixed feeling: the pride of having temporarily recreated a Roman Empire, but the certainty that this enterprise is difficult to maintain. The reflux after his death reveals the fragility of the conquests. Unable to sustain a constant military effort and defend against multiple enemies, the Byzantine Empire retracts to more manageable territories. Although the ambitions of Renovatio Imperii remain in the imperial imagination, they clash with the reality of borders and emerging powers. However, Justinian will be remembered as a great legislator whose Codex Justinianus is a cornerstone of civil law, and as an audacious builder whose Hagia Sophia remains a symbol of his will for greatness. His reign embodies a synthesis between the Roman world and Christian civilization, a model of centralizing authority and unbridled ambition. The Justinian age testifies to a peak for Byzantine power and the beginning of a slow erosion, illustrating the complexity and vulnerability of this imperial legacy. At the beginning of the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire is weakened by internal divisions and external threats. For decades, imperial authority has eroded due to rebellions and weakened administration. In 602, Emperor Maurice is overthrown by a military revolt that puts focus on the throne. Despite his violent accession, he fails to restore stability and tensions rise. This instability pushes many governors to seek alternative solutions. In 610, Heraclius, son of the powerful Exarch of Carthage, lands in Constantinople and overthrows Phocas, marking the beginning of the Heraclius era, characterized by reforms and resistance against external threats. Heraclius must immediately confront the aggression of the Sassanids, who take advantage of the situation to launch a massive offensive. Under King Khosrow II, the Persian Empire rapidly captures vast territories, threatening Egypt and the grain stores of Constantinople. Aware that the survival of the empire depends on victory against the Persians, Heraclius launches a counter-offensive in 622. The war lasts until 627, culminating in the Battle of Nineveh, where the Byzantine army inflicts a decisive defeat on the Persians. Khosrow Seku is overthrown, ending the open hostility between the two empires. This victory restores stability to the eastern borders. However, the Byzantine Empire must face the emergence of Islam. Born around 570, Muhammad received his first revelations in 610, and at his death in 632, his successors unified the Arab tribes. The empire, exhausted by its conflicts with the Persians, is caught off guard when the Arab armies invade Syria in 634. After the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, the Byzantines lose Syria and, by 641, Egypt. These conquests disrupt the regional balance as the empire loses territories essential to its economy and demographics. Heraclius, aged and ill, witnesses the dislocation of the Roman legacy he had sought to preserve, while the Arab Caliphate becomes a dominant power in the Levant. In response to the loss of territories, the Byzantine government must rethink its military and administrative structure to preserve the empire. It is in this context that the reform of the themes emerges under Heraclius, aimed at ensuring more effective defense without relying on costly professional troops. The term theme, initially a division of the army, gradually refers to a jurisdiction under the authority of a strategos, a military governor. Each strategos recruits and organizes soldier farmers in his territory, enabling rapid mobilization and better local control. This organization reduces the risk of sudden uprisings, as troops remain close to their lands and families. Additionally, the themes ensure economic stability by maintaining agricultural productivity in strategic areas. Although the reform is gradual, it is crucial for the survival of the Byzantine Empire, allowing Constantinople to maintain its status as a regional power despite the loss of vast territories in the Near East. The themes lay the foundation for a resilient defense system against Arab threats and others. Heraclius dies in 641, leaving a transformed empire better prepared for the challenges ahead. Among the symbols of Byzantine victory over the Persians is the restitution of the true cross, believed to be the wood on which Jesus Christ was crucified. Captured by the Sassanids, it had been taken to Persia to humiliate the Byzantine Christians. After the Battle of Nineveh and the fall of Khosrow II, Heraclius secures its restitution in 628, and according to tradition, goes to Jerusalem to place it back in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This event is celebrated as a spiritual and political triumph, illustrating the power of imperial faith and the role of Byzantium as the protector of Christendom. However, this victory does not mask the empire's fragility in the face of upcoming upheavals. Despite the loss of Syria and Egypt, the Arabs continue their expansion. The Umayyad caliphs dream of seizing Constantinople, a strategic crossroads between Europe and Asia. In 674, their fleet imposes a blockade on the capital, while troops encircle Thrace. Emperor Constantine IV has Greek fire, a flammable liquid that burns even on water, sowing panic among the assailants. After several years of skirmishes, the Umayyads retreat in 678, recognizing the impregnable rampart of the walls of Constantinople. In 717, a new siege is launched under Emperor Leo III. The combination of solid defenses and Greek fire, along with the harsh winter, forces the Umayyads to retreat in 718. These failures confirm the resilience of Byzantium, which retains its heart in Constantinople, remaining a political and spiritual authority. The 7th century ends and the 8th begins on a note of hope. The two Arab failures before the capital mark a new military balance in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Byzantine Empire, after this troubled phase, emerges profoundly transformed. The Heraclian dynasty, launched by the coup d'état of 610, has reconquered the territories lost to the Sassanid Persia, but has had to cede most of the Levant and Egypt to Muslim conquests. The themes, created to reinforce the defense of the state, establish a more decentralized organization, focused on local protection and the preservation of resources. The recovery of the true cross symbolizes Byzantium's attachment to its Christian heritage, while the defense of Constantinople against Arab sieges demonstrates the empire's resilience, both militarily and spiritually. However, the balance remains fragile, and Arab power continues to grow. This century of challenges initiates a period of redefinition of Byzantine identity, marked by the transition from the Eastern Roman Empire to a Greco-Christian state. Despite losses and threats, Byzantium begins to enter a new era, where it will seek to preserve its status in the Mediterranean world through its fortresses and a reformed administration. The first major turning point of the Byzantine Empire between 726 and 843 is marked by iconoclasm and intense religious and political controversy. Emperor Leo III, reigning since 717, publishes in 726 an edict banning the worship of icons, sacred representations that had been present in churches and monasteries until then. These images were perceived by their supporters as objects of devotion, not as idols. Leo III wanted to eliminate all risk of idolatry and assert imperial authority, blending religious and political issues. He also sought to strengthen his role as protector of the faith against heresies and the influence of the church. The iconoclastic movement goes beyond a simple doctrinal quarrel. The monasteries, economic strongholds thanks to donations, ardently defended icons as a legitimate link to the divine. On the other side, the state, supported by soldiers and officials, saw the prohibition of icons as a means to reduce the influence of the church. Military pressures, such as those from the Umayyads and the Bulgars, and past defeats, perceived as divine punishment for idolatry, reinforced the arguments of the iconoclasts. Internal tensions led to violent confrontations in the following decades. After the death of Leo III in 741, his son Constantine V vigorously continues the iconoclastic policy. Born in 718, he sees in this struggle a means to bolster imperial authority and ideologically unify the empire. In 754, he convocates a council in Hieria, which officially condemns icons, a decision rejected by their defenders. Repression intensifies, rebellious monasteries are confiscated, and several monks are exiled. However, the population remains divided, the elites often supporting the emperor, while some remain attached to the iconodual traditions. Tensions escalate when Constantine V imposes his views by force. At the death of Constantine V in 775, his son Leo IV succeeds him, but his reign remains brief. From 775 to 780, he continues the iconoclastic line, though less rigorously than his father. His premature death paves the way for the regency of his wife Irene, who takes power on behalf of her son Constantine VI, and temporarily restores the veneration of icons in 787. She convenes the Second Council of Nicaea, which declares the worship of images legitimate while limiting abuses. Irene allies with the ecclesiastical hierarchy to weaken the still influential iconoclasm in the state. However, the iconoclastic power base remains strong, and the restoration of iconodualism remains fragile. Irene also seeks to gain popular support by encouraging the production of icons and the reconstruction of monasteries. But rivalry with the West intensifies when in 800 Charlemagne is crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III, marking a break with the Byzantine Empire. This new geopolitical opposition complicates Irene's situation, who seeks in vain an alliance with Charlemagne. In 802, she is deposed by a palace conspiracy, ending her power and weakening the iconodualism she had attempted to establish. After its fall, emperors succeed each other between moderate reforms and sporadic returns to iconoclasm. Nicephorus Affair 802-811 attempts to reconcile the factions while conducting campaigns against the Bulgarians. However, under Leo V, the Armenian 8113-820, iconoclasm vigorously resumes, and the supporters of iconodualism are persecuted. In a tense geopolitical context, iconoclasm is seen as a marker of authority, but it contributes to internal divisions without alleviating external threats. In 820, Michael II, known as the Amorian, comes to power and adopts a more tolerant stance, although he does not fully restore iconodualism. His reign, 820-829, is marked by the revolt of Thomas the Slav, which he represses, but the empire remains weakened. In 829, his son Theophilus succeeds him and continues a strict iconoclastic policy. Theophilus, a reformer in administration and the military, has frescoes and mosaics contrary to imperial decrees destroyed, reinforcing social polarization despite some diplomatic successes. The death of Theophilus in 842 allows his wife, Empress Theodora, to rule for their son, Michael III. A supporter of iconodualism, she officially ends iconoclasm in 843, marking an event celebrated as the triumph of orthodoxy. Icons are restored in Hagia Sophia, and many monasteries reopen. Theodora, supported by Patriarch Methodius I, proclaims that the veneration of images is in accordance with Christian doctrine, as long as one distinguishes the image from the divine prototype. This position, supported for a century by iconodules, becomes state doctrine. The consolidation of the cult of icons is seen as a foundational act of Byzantine identity. Iconoclasts are amnestied, although some remain dissenting. This spiritual triumph goes beyond a simple doctrinal victory. It marks the beginning of cultural expansion and internal stabilization. The Church stimulates a monastic revival and the production of theological works, consolidating the Orthodox Christian legacy. Trade exchanges resume, especially with Italy and Slavic regions, revitalizing the empire's economy. In Anatolia, border provinces, once vulnerable to Arab raids, experience pacification. The development of abandoned lands supports the reconstruction of peasant communities. Military districts, reorganized into themes, strengthen local defense and administration. This dynamic initiates an agricultural and demographic revival, laying the groundwork for a prosperous and resilient era. In summary, the iconoclastic period, 726-843, is marked by religious, political, and military tensions. Emperors, from Leo III to Theophilus, alternated between prohibition and rehabilitation of icons, depending on the power dynamics. The end of iconoclasm under Theodora leads to a lasting reconciliation between imperial power and the Church, fostering a phase of institutional strengthening and agricultural stabilization. This chapter leaves a Byzantine Empire unified around the Orthodox dogma, ready to reassert itself as a major player in the Mediterranean world. In 867, the Byzantine Empire stands at a turning point. After decades of disputes related to iconoclasm, the Macedonian dynasty emerges. This period, known as the Macedonian Renaissance, sees the rise of Basil I, known as the Macedonian, who ousts Michael III from the throne. Of humble origins, Basil Fern comes from a peasant family in Macedonia. He surrounds himself with influential allies and skillfully maneuvers to eliminate Bardas, Michael III's uncle. His ascent marks the beginning of an era of reforms, cultural flourishing, and the reinforcement of imperial authority. Among his achievements is the revision of Byzantine law, the Basilica, which clarifies laws and unifies them around a coherent structure in Greek, more accessible than Latin. This reform simplifies previous provisions and strengthens central authority, marking the Byzantine Empire as an administrative power. Basil I's religious policy also leans toward the expansion of imperial influence. In this context, the alliance with Slavic peoples is realized through the mission of Cyril and Methodius, tasked with evangelizing Great Moravia. To overcome linguistic barriers, they create an adapted alphabet, the Glagolitic, which will become the basis of the Cyrillic alphabet. Their success consolidates Constantinople's position as a protector of the Orthodox faith and disseminates its influence as far as the Balkans, laying the foundations for Christianization. Thus, under Basil I, Byzantium establishes itself as a vibrant missionary center that radiates well beyond its borders. Upon the death of Basil I in 886, his legacy continued through Leo VI, known as the Wise, and the Macedonian dynasty. The foundations laid by Basil I enabled an active foreign policy and efficient internal organization. The emperors enhanced the prestige of the court of Constantinople and ensured the commercial growth of the empire, while intensifying diplomatic ties with the Slavic principalities. The imperial administration perfected its ability to levy taxes and maintain order. This balance between the capital and the provinces allowed the empire to prosper even in the face of crises. Under Basil X, a later heir of this dynasty, the empire reached its territorial and military peak, particularly during his campaign against the First Bulgarian Empire. Basil X, who reigned from 976 to 1025, became one of the greatest strategists in Byzantine history, earning the nickname Bulgar Slayer. From the moment he ascended to the throne, he faced the ambitions of the Bulgarian Tsar Samuil, leading to frequent clashes between the two powers. The decisive confrontation occurred in 1014 at the Battle of Cladion, where Basil II surprised the Bulgarian army, inflicting a crushing defeat. Legend has it that the emperor had nearly all the Bulgarian prisoners blinded, leaving only one healthy man for every 100. This act left a lasting impression on his contemporaries and contributed to the image of Basil II as ruthless. Bulgaria, weakened, was gradually integrated into the empire, marking a major expansion of Byzantium. Military successes and regained stability fostered a cultural flourishing. The Macedonian emperors, defenders of orthodoxy and a strong state, encouraged the creation of masterpieces. At Hagia Sophia, new mosaics adorned the walls and domes, depicting biblical scenes and imperial portraits, and attested to the artistic refinement achieved. Illuminated manuscripts also reached an exceptional level of sophistication. The Menologion, a liturgical collection, is an emblematic example. These works, often enhanced with gold, illustrate the harmony between Orthodox tradition and imperial creativity, supported by the copyists and illuminators of the imperial scriptoriums, radiating even to the west. In this climate of increased power, diplomatic relations with other major regional forces became strategic. To the south, the empire faced the Fatimids, a Shiite dynasty established in North Africa and Egypt, seeking to assert itself as a center of Islam and extending their sovereignty to the Levant, near Byzantine possessions. To avoid conflict and preserve trade exchanges, Constantinople negotiated tributes. According to chronicles, a treaty set the annual sum demanded by the Fatimids at 15,000 gold bulls to ensure peace. While burdensome, this amount secures stability in the provinces and vital exchanges. This shows that Byzantium, despite its military strength, sometimes favored a pragmatic diplomacy to maintain balance. Under the Macedonian dynasty, the internal organization of the empire underwent significant transformations. It was during this time that the system of pronoia was born, sometimes compared to Western feudalism. This system is based on the granting of lands or fiscal rights to dignitaries or officers in exchange for their loyalty and the provision of troops in times of conflict. This arrangement allows for the rewarding of military elites, consolidating imperial control and delegating resource management. While reversible and preserving imperial supremacy, pronoia avoids the fragmentation of power and foreshadows certain medieval developments while maintaining the unity of the empire. Upon the death of Basil II in 1025, the Byzantine Empire was in full prosperity. The borders were expanded, diplomacy was successful, and orthodoxy was entrenched across vast Slavic territories. Artistic treasures, such as the mosaics of Hagia Sophia and illuminated manuscripts, illustrate an unprecedented refinement. The basilica, inherited from Basil III, ensures legal and administrative stability, while the system of pronoia supports the army and imperial authority in the provinces. Through this combination of military strength, skillful diplomacy, and culture, the Macedonian dynasty bestowed upon Byzantium an impressive luster, inheritor of Rome and poised for the future. In the middle of the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire faces serious internal and external upheavals. In 1025, Basil II, nicknamed the Bulgar Slayer, dies without a direct heir capable of maintaining his authority. The empire, although seemingly vast and stable, finds itself weakened. The finances remain relatively solid, but stability depended on the personality of Basil II and his entourage, which becomes a problem upon his death. His successors are less competent, more inclined to yield to the aristocrats, eager to regain their privileges lost under Basil II. Over the decades, imperial authority deteriorates under successive crises. The emperors come from mediocre aristocracy or access power through intrigues rather than military competence. Between 1025 and 1050, the high nobility strengthens its grip on the economy and taxation, accumulating private land holdings. This makes the central government dependent, and to compensate for declining fiscal revenues, several emperors attempt to impose additional taxes on the peasants. These peasants, already burdened, often rebel, supported by local lords. The uprisings are primarily in Asia Minor, where peasant soldiers, deprived of resources, grow increasingly discontented. Poorly executed agrarian reforms exacerbate tensions and destabilize the empire. The diplomatic scene also becomes complicated. To the west, the Normans, under Robert Guiscard, seek to extend their influence over Byzantine possessions. Their ambition is compounded by the rise of other European feudal powers, which also eye Byzantine territories. The Byzantines, faced with the weakness of their garrisons and internal revolts, recruit Western mercenaries, often Normans or Germans, who eventually turn against them. To the east, a much greater threat emerges with the arrival of the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia. These horsemen, from the Oghuz tribe, venture into Anatolia, taking advantage of Byzantine weakness and the lack of eastern defenses. The situation becomes critical under Emperor Constantine Mavromonomachos, reigned 1042-1055, and his successors, who are unable to strengthen military themes in Anatolia. The provincial governors, from rival families, fight for imperial favor, while the Seljuks multiply their raids. Byzantine generals, lacking cohesion and clear directives, struggle to contain these incursions. Losses multiply in areas close to Armenia, and the effectiveness of the fortresses declines. In 1054, Alp Arslan begins a series of expeditions into eastern Anatolia, taking advantage of the winter passes. Although the Byzantine Empire maintains a theoretically superior force, its troops are dispersed and unprepared, facilitating Turkish penetration into the interior, aggravated by the fragmentation of imperial authority. In the 1060s, emperors are more preoccupied with fighting internal rivals than organizing the defense of Anatolia. Romanos IV. Diogenes, a military aristocrat, ascends to the throne in 1068 through his marriage to Empress Eudocia Makrembolitissa, the widow of Constantine the Succinct Ducas. Aware of the Seljuk threat, he recruits Frankish, Norman, and Varangian mercenaries to strengthen the Byzantine army, aiming to defend Armenia and Lake Van, strategic points against invasions. This leads to the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, where Emperor Romanos IV faces Alp Arslan. Despite this large army, the Byzantine forces lack logistics and unity of command, with nobles from the Ducas clan refusing to fully support the emperor. On August 26, 1071, the battle begins in confusion. Turkish archers harass the Byzantine lines, while Romanos IV's cavalry struggles to advance. The situation deteriorates when some mercenaries and generals linked to the Ducas withdraw or flee, turning the retreat into a rout. Romanos IV is captured by Alp Arslan, and the battle marks the loss of central Anatolia. Negotiations fail to limit the losses, as the emperor, taken hostage, sees his authority severely weakened. The Anatolian plateau rapidly falls into the hands of the Seljuks, and the Byzantines lose their essential fiscal and military resources. The path into the interior of Byzantine territory is now open to the Seljuks and numerous bands of warriors. The defeat at Manzikert marks the beginning of a long civil war. The nobility of Constantinople tears itself apart over the succession. The Ducas clan ousts Romanos IV and places Michael VII Ducas on the throne. Romanos, freed, attempts to return to power but is defeated and blinded. Other aristocratic factions, including those of Isaac Comnenus and the supporters of Basileus, complicate the situation. Pretenders succeed one another, weakening the army and the administration. The Seljuks extend their influence, creating the Sultanate of Rum in central Anatolia by the late 1070s. The Byzantines retain the large coastal cities and a western fringe of Asia Minor, but within, imperial authority becomes increasingly rare. Threats multiply from the north and west. The Pechenegs and the Cumans threaten the Danube border, Bulgaria is restless, and Robert Guiscard plans an invasion against Epirus and the Dalmatian coast. Michael VII reigned 1071-1078, and his successors lack determination in the face of these threats. Finances dwindle, revenues from Anatolia disappear, and wheat shipments are lacking. The emperors of the Ducas family attempt financial maneuvers, including currency devaluation, but this further destabilizes the economy. Western merchants, particularly Venice, take advantage of the situation, demanding privileges. To maintain a precarious stability, the Byzantine court concedes, increasing dependence on Italian merchants and navies. The empire, in chaos, sees the rise of the Comnenus family, several members of which have distinguished themselves in military campaigns and administration. Alexios Comnenus, nephew of Isaac I, forges a reputation as a competent leader. In 1081, after the deposition of Emperor Nikephoros III Botaniates, Alexios takes power and founds the Comnenian dynasty. His reign begins in turmoil. He must negotiate with aristocratic factions, suppress feudal revolts, and face pressure from the Seljuks and Normans. Robert Guiscard attacks in Epirus, and Alexios, aware of the empire's isolation, seeks a diplomatic solution. Thus, Alexios I, desperate due to the situation, solicits help from the West, particularly from the Pope and Latin princes, hoping for a religious reconciliation between Rome and Constantinople since the schism of 1054. He sends emissaries to seek military support to repel the Seljuks and reclaim part of Anatolia. This will lead to the Council of Clermont in 1095 and the launch of the First Crusade in 1096. Alexios's call, born from the fear of the empire's collapse, will be a catalyst that will disrupt the Near East and the Mediterranean balance for decades. But in 1081, Alexios navigates in uncertainty, hoping for a response from the West, while knowing that this aid could make the empire dependent, particularly through commercial concessions and a controversial religious rapprochement. From 1025 to 1081, the empire undergoes a series of major crises. The defeat at Manzikert in 1071 leads to the loss of central Anatolia and devastating civil wars. Feudal tensions, Norman incursions, and the rise of the Seljuks weaken the empire. These trials will lead to a last resort, the appeal to the West, which will trigger the First Crusade. In 1081, the Byzantine Empire, although weakened, begins to reconstitute itself under the Komnenian dynasty, while trying to contain Latin and Turkish threats. In 1081, the Byzantine Empire is about to undergo a major turning point in its history. Reduced by past defeats and beset by new enemies, it requires a strong leader capable of restoring its power. It is Alexios III Komnenos who emerges as this providential savior. With remarkable strategic intelligence, he ascends to the throne amidst troubled times, besieged in the west by the Normans of Robert Guiscard and in the east by the Seljuk Turks. Aware that the Byzantine army must be restructured, Alexios reorganizes his troops around two pillars: the cataphractoi, heavily armored cavalry, and the Varangian Guard, consisting of particularly loyal Nordic mercenaries. Supported by an aristocracy eager to regain its prestige, he also undertakes a series of economic reforms aimed at stabilizing the currency and strengthening tax revenues. Thanks to these measures, he wards off the most urgent threats and begins to lay the foundations for an era of renewal, known as the Komnenian Renaissance, which is promising. To consolidate this recovery, Alexios quickly understands the importance of maritime routes. He therefore allies himself with the powerful Italian merchant cities, including Venice, which is granted unprecedented commercial privileges as early as 1082. In exchange, the Serenissima commits to putting its fleet at the empire's service, thus protecting the Byzantine coasts against Norman incursions. This pact, while ensuring an increase in security and wealth, also establishes a maritime dependence on the Venetians. In Constantinople, the influx of Italian merchants stimulates the circulation of spices, silk, and precious metals, while the urban population diversifies. Reinvesting tax revenues, Alexios strengthens the city walls, reorganizes the administration, and reinforces his authority in the provinces. On the diplomatic front, he also encourages occasional negotiations with the Seljuk Turks in order to gain time and consolidate the army. Despite the persistence of multiple threats, the empire gradually reconnects with prosperity, thanks to this cunning combination of political pragmatism, fiscal reforms, and innovative alliances. On the military front, the Byzantine doctrine refines under Alexios. The cataphractes, masters of the cavalry charge, complement the Varangian Guard, renowned for its fierce loyalty. Alongside them, lighter units ensure reconnaissance and harassment of the enemy. With a renovated army, the emperor manages to contain the Normans in Epirus and the Balkans, while negotiating with certain Turkish princes settled in Anatolia. Nevertheless, victories remain fragile as the Normans repeatedly attack, first led by Robert Guiscard, then by his son Bohemond. The Pechenegs, a nomadic people from the steppes, sometimes join the tumult, forcing Byzantium to multiply fronts. Alexios knows how to use matrimonial diplomacy, marrying members of his family to rival nobles to separate enemy alliances. This combination of military strategies and dynastic agreements enables the empire to regain vital maneuverability, keeping Constantinople safe from any direct invasion and granting the capital much-needed respite. Around 1096, a new factor disrupts the situation: the First Crusade. Frankish and Norman lords cross the empire to reach the Holy Land, raising Alexios's mistrust. To assert his power, he organizes a water tournament on the Golden Horn, where richly adorned ships compete. According to chroniclers, armored knights and Varangian archers participate to impress the western barons. The stands are filled with Byzantine nobles and foreign ambassadors, who come to admire the daring choreography of these naval jousts. Beyond the spectacle, the emperor aims to assert Byzantium's superiority and remind his guests of the necessity to respect his authority. This sumptuous event also serves as a prelude to temporary agreements. In exchange for provisions and escorts, Alexios obtains loyalty oaths from the Crusader leaders, who agree to hand over any city they might take back from the empire. This astute strategy limits the danger posed by these foreign troops amassed near Constantinople. Imperial prestige grows. During these years, the Byzantine court also shines on the cultural front. Princess Anna Komnena, daughter of Alexios, writes the Alexiad, a detailed historical account that recounts her father's deeds. Her erudite style reflects the literary refinement of the capital, where philosophers, theologians, and jurists coexist. Among these scholars, John Zonaras stands out for his legal and religious compilations, which have become references for scholars. The visual arts are not left behind. Cloisonné enamel, a complex technique that involves setting metal cells before filling them with colored enamel, experiences a spectacular revival. The imperial workshops thus produce icons, reliquaries, and liturgical objects of rare finesse. This artistic effervescence attracts the attention of the West, still charmed by ancient masterpieces and eager for new things. Rich commissions flow in and enhance imperial prestige, consolidating Constantinople's reputation as an unparalleled center of creation and knowledge. Local elites ardently support these artistic projects. In 1118, Alexios passed away, leaving a stronger empire to his son John II Komnenos. Known as John the Good for his piety and sense of duty, this monarch continues his father's work with caution. He updates administrative reforms, ensures discipline in the army, and strengthens ties with Venice to maintain Byzantine maritime supremacy. On the Eastern Front, he faces the Seljuks and the Danishmends, Turkish princes established in northern Anatolia. John undertakes several campaigns to stabilize the Cilician region and preserve the road to Antioch, a strategic city near the Latin states of the East. Through shrewd diplomacy, he sometimes secures the neutrality of certain emirs, thus limiting the opening of new fronts. Despite a reign less flamboyant than that of his father, John II manages to maintain a relative balance, preventing the imperial territory from being eroded by numerous enemies. His political acumen reassures the elites, thus reinforcing the emerging internal harmony. In 1143, the sudden death of John II brings his son Manuel I Komnenos to the throne, an energetic and ambitious sovereign. He harbors vast expansion plans, hoping to strengthen the Byzantine position in the Mediterranean against the Normans of Sicily and the Latin kingdoms. Diplomatically, Manuel first cultivates good relations with the Crusader states, forging marriages and treaties to contain the Turkish threat. However, his repeated military campaigns against Roger II of Sicily often result in limited successes and exorbitant costs. The imperial treasury, put under strain, suffers the impact of these operations combined with a sumptuous lifestyle at court. To the north, Hungary attempts to take advantage of Byzantine difficulties to increase its influence in the Balkans, forcing Manuel to open multiple fronts simultaneously. Despite these tensions, the empire retains a certain economic dynamism, made possible by the vitality of trade and the loyalty of the Anatolian provinces, tied to the theme system and fortified. The final years of Manuel I's reign, however, are overshadowed by the failure of new campaigns and the rise of a climate of distrust. When the emperor dies in 1180, his son, Alexios II, is just a child, and the regency proves chaotic. Power struggles intensify, while external pressure mounts. The Normans of Sicily launch a raid on Thessalonica in 1185, spreading terror. In this context, Andronic I's Komnenos, a cousin of Manuel, seizes the throne in 1182 through a coup supported by the crowd. He attempts to restore imperial authority through violence, purging the court and executing Alexios II to eliminate any challenge. His brief and bloody reign plunges the empire into confusion, weakening the gains of the Komnenian dynasty. In 1185, a revolt puts an end to Andronic's actions, but the empire emerges considerably weakened from these successive crises, losing much of the momentum that had characterized the Komnenian Renaissance. The period 1081–1185 thus concludes on a bitter downturn. Despite this tragic end, the Komnenian Renaissance remains a brilliant phase in Byzantine history. From the ascension of Alexios IV to the fall of Andronic III, the empire has repelled formidable enemies, modernized its army, and forged strategic alliances with Italian powers. Constantinople has become a major intellectual and artistic center once again, and the empire has held off Normans, Hungarians, Seljuks, and Danish-men sultans, maintaining a fragile balance between the West and the East. Although structural weaknesses remain, such as the greed of certain nobles and dependence on the Venetians, the literary and military achievements testify to the vitality of Byzantium on the brink of the 12th century. In the year 1185, the Byzantine Empire stands on the brink of a major crisis. Emperor Andronic I Komnenos, who ascended to the throne 2 years earlier, has distinguished himself by his iron fist and brutal governance. His affiliation with the famous Komnenos dynasty is not enough to preserve his popularity, which erodes as his political and fiscal purges intensify. The great feudal lords fear being sidelined or eliminated, while the population, already exhausted by taxes, sees their hopes for stability betrayed. In this bitter climate, several hotspots of revolt emerge. The Balkans, in particular, become the theater of a decisive insurrection. Two Bulgarian brothers named Asen and Petar take advantage of the general confusion to proclaim the restoration of an independent Bulgarian kingdom, breaking with imperial authority. Byzantium, forced to disperse its troops on multiple fronts, fails to maintain order in these provinces. Isolated, Andronic alienates even his former supporters. A violent contestation rumbles, fueled by fear and uncertainty. Tensions quickly reach the capital. Constantinople buzzes with rumors of a coup, and rival factions seek to profit from imperial weakness. During the summer of 1185, the situation shifts. A large-scale riot erupts in the city. Supporters of Isaac II Angelus, taking advantage of popular anger, overthrow Andronic. The people, worn out by years of repression and abuses, deliver the former emperor to punishment. Arrested, he is soon executed in an expedited manner. The new ruler, Isaac II Angelus, belongs to the Angelus dynasty. Immediately, hopes for a calming governance, focused on reconciliation and the restoration of imperial authority, are placed in him. However, these expectations turn into disillusionment. Isaac, lacking experience and surrounded by greedy courtiers, struggles to reform an already weakened administration. Corruption spreads within the Angelus family. Dignitaries, eager for wealth, plunder the state treasury rather than consolidate defenses at the borders. Bulgaria, under the leadership of Asen and Petar, finally emancipates itself, depriving Byzantium of a crucial source of grain and soldiers. Autonomous military leaders take advantage of this to arrogate regional prerogatives. Unable to remedy the situation, the Angelus dynasty quickly loses the credit it once enjoyed. In the provinces, anxiety rises. Everyone fears that the empire may initiate an inevitable disintegration. At the beginning of the 13th century, the Byzantine Empire is weakened by internal crises and the loss of key territories. It cannot anticipate the shock that will strike it from the west. Indeed, the Fourth Crusade, decided around 1202, was initially intended to head toward Egypt or the Holy Land to reconquer Jerusalem. But the Crusaders, mainly French barons and Venetian merchants, forge a decisive agreement with the Doge of Venice, Enrico Dandolo. To provide the necessary fleet, Venice demands a hefty payment that the Crusaders cannot afford. In search of alternatives, Dandolo then proposes to divert the army to Constantinople, promising the knights rich plunder and the chance to get involved in Byzantine affairs. The Crusaders agree, hoping to find both glory and treasures there. In the spring of 1203, their ships surge onto the shores of the Bosporus. The Byzantine capital, already undermined by instability, finds itself defenseless against these well-organized warriors from the west. The citizens of Constantinople, incredulous, see this imposing fleet arrive, which displays both the banners of Christendom and the Venetian emblem, a sign of new commercial ambitions. Isaac II. Angelus, faced with the crusading offensive, tries to make allies of them. He promises money, relics, and a religious alliance with Rome, hoping to consolidate his own legitimacy. However, the Byzantine population, largely attached to the Orthodox tradition, rises in revolt at the idea of a too close union with the Latin Church. Inside the walls, riots break out. The Crusaders, frustrated by the delay in promised payments, prepare for the attack. In April 1204, they launch the final assault on Constantinople. The subsequent sack is remembered as one of the most violent events in medieval Christian history. Palaces, churches, and libraries are plundered. Numerous sacred relics and priceless works of art are taken to the west. The famous bronze horses, once displayed in the Hippodrome, take the road to Venice. The inhabitants who can flee, urgently taking a few belongings. The Byzantine Empire, already on the brink, suffers a nearly fatal blow with the fall of its capital to so-called allies of the same god. The victors established the Latin Empire of Constantinople, the first emperor being Baldwin of Flanders. The Crusader barons and the Venetians then divide immense territories, splitting what remains of the Byzantine Empire. This Latin empire deepens the divide between Greeks and Latins. The religious tensions, born from the schism of 1054 between Rome and Constantinople, are further exacerbated by the exactions suffered by the Orthodox population. While the new Latin elite attempts to govern by force and coercion, many Byzantines seek refuge elsewhere. A fragmentation of power occurs. Several centers of Byzantine resistance emerge in the margins. The Empire of Trebizond, founded on the shores of the Black Sea by exiled members of the Comnenist dynasty, proclaims its imperial legitimacy. In Epirus, in northwestern Greece, the Doukas family establishes a second power base, ambitious and sometimes rivaling other claimants. However, the strongest revival organizes itself in Nicaea, in Asia Minor. Theodore Lascaris, primarily a close relative by marriage of the late Emperor Alexius III Angelus, manages to gather nobility and clergy to reconstitute an embryonic administration. He proclaims himself Byzantine Emperor in exile, considering his title more legitimate than Baldwin's, a barbarian Westerner in the eyes of the Greeks. The imperial institutions, as best as they can, are maintained there. Synods are convened, the study of theology and law continues, while the glorious memory of the lost great capital haunts every ceremony. Meanwhile, the region of Epirus follows its own destiny. Initially governed by Michael I Doukas, it welcomes various refugees from Constantinople, hoping to compete with Nicaea to become the basis for Byzantine restoration. The Epirites seize Thessalonica in 1224, gaining a strategic position in Greece. They then present themselves as the liberators of the cheese-producing provinces. Oops, little mistake. In truth, they proclaim themselves as guardians of orthodoxy against the Latin occupier. Despite these high ambitions, Epirus and Nicaea fail to coordinate their efforts, sometimes harboring jealous rivalry. The Latin Empire, for its part, struggles to impose itself. Its territorial hold is very fragmented, and it depends on changing alliances depending on the regions. The Western garrisons are constantly threatened by uprisings from local populations. In this fragmented context, each Byzantine entity dreams of reconquering Constantinople and reviving the imperial flame. The title of Emperor of the Romans, as Byzantine rulers refer to themselves, becomes the subject of power struggles between Nicaea, Epirus, and even Trebizond. A shared objective, but divergent means. Such is the paradox of this era. In Nicaea, Theodore Lascaris and his successors set up an operational state structure. Cultivated officials, coming from the former courts of Constantinople, developed new strategies to defend Asia Minor against potential Latin or Seljuk assaults. Concerned about their legitimacy, these exiled emperors do everything they can to preserve imperial symbols. A famous anecdote illustrates their determination. The imperial crown of Byzantium, the centerpiece of the coronation, was said to have been hidden in a sardine box during the fall of Constantinople. Loyal servants reportedly risked crossing the Bosporus at night to hide this jewel from Western greed. Once safely arrived in Nicaea, the crown became the tangible emblem of the continuity of the power of the Basileus. Under Lascaris's protection, the Orthodox clergy continues to uphold sacred rites, while literati and philosophers strive to keep alive the literary heritage and the appreciation for subtle theology characteristic of Byzantine tradition. Each religious service, each ceremony of court recalls the former splendor of Constantinople and nourishes the hope of a return. Over the years, the Latin Empire of Constantinople fails to consolidate. The Latin emperors struggle to assert their authority over the Byzantine population, which remains fundamentally hostile to them. The Western feudal lords, stationed around the capital, divide for their own interests, while the Pope, weary of their squabbles, stops giving unconditional support. Lacking financial solidity, this Latin state must constantly hire mercenaries of varied origins, often more inclined to pillage than to protect. In contrast, the Empire of Nicaea, under the reigns of John III, Ducas Vatatzis, 1222-1254, and then his son, Theodore II Lascaris, 1254-1258, progressively consolidates its positions. By regaining territories to the west and forging agreements with some local elites, Nicaea builds a much more stable base. Historians also note that John III Vatatzis, an energetic sovereign, strives to revive agriculture and craftsmanship, in order to provide a sustainable economic boost to his provinces. Little by little, the balance of power shifts. Where the Latin Empire withers, Nicaea grows stronger and maintains the ambition, never denied, to reconquer the great capital. In this context, the Epirus entity remains a secondary force, although it experienced initial successes in Macedonia and mainland Greece. It suffers from internal dissension and pressure from neighboring Western kingdoms. Moreover, the Empire of Trebizond mostly confines itself to its maritime facade on the Black Sea, thriving thanks to trade routes, but remaining too isolated to aspire to the capital. Thus, hopes for a concrete restoration are focused on Nicaea. When Theodore II Lascaris dies, power passes to regents and eventually falls to Michael Palaiologos, an ambitious aristocrat whose stated goal is to retake Constantinople to restore Byzantine legitimacy. This Michael Palaiologos, later Michael VIII, skillfully maneuvers among the great families, buying the loyalty of several military commanders and consolidating his grip on all Nicaean institutions. By the end of the 1250s, he actively prepares for the long-desired reconquest. In 1261, an unforeseen opportunity arises. Constantinople is poorly defended. Most of the Latin troops and their fleet are mobilized elsewhere, perhaps in operations against rivals or occupied watching remote territories. Michael VIII, Palaiologos, seizes the moment. In the night of July 24th, 1261, some chroniclers suggest the date of the 25th. Byzantine soldiers approach the walls discreetly, led by General Alexis Strategopoulos, according to several sources. The gates are opened from the inside, taking advantage of the cooperation of Greeks remaining in the capital or a negligent garrison. By morning, panic spreads among the Latin defenders. Some flee by sea, others surrender without putting up real resistance. The Latin Empire, established since 1204, collapses in a few hours. Michael VIII then makes his triumphant entry into the city, restored as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The people, still in shock, witness the return of the imperial insignia. In a solemn gesture, Michael VIII is crowned in the church that has now become the symbol of this rebirth, bursting forth with a joy tinged with sadness. The city still bears the scars of pillage, and many monuments remain in ruins. However, the essential has been accomplished. The Byzantines, exiled in Nicaea for more than half a century, finally return to their political and spiritual home. Thus ends the interregnum of Nicaea. Henceforth, the dynasty of the Palaiologos reigns over Byzantium, embarking on the last great chapter of its history. The imperial territory, certainly less vast than in the time of medieval splendor, is once again administered from the Golden Horn. Michael VIII, a shrewd tactician, attempts to rekindle some diplomatic alliances to strengthen his position against multiple threats. Latin principalities remaining in Greece, Serbian kings, Bulgarians, and the rising power of the Ottoman Turks in Asia Minor. Nevertheless, the symbolic prestige of having restored the Byzantine capital under Greek control is enough to rally many nobles and ecclesiastics, reviving a collective pride. While the city no longer boasts the luxurious radiance of past centuries, there is still a sense of historical continuity. The Orthodox clergy, now united, celebrate the return of the legitimate Basilius to the throne of Constantinople. The scholars, for their part, exchange manuscripts and knowledge, making the reconquest of 1261 the starting point of a new intellectual era, even if financial resources are limited. The memory of these years is marked by picturesque tales, among which is the anecdote of the sardine box, embodying the Greek determination to save its imperial heritage. History recounts an empire forced into exile, defying Latin dominance, which miraculously manages to reconquer its great city. However, the event of 1261 does not erase the immense challenges awaiting Byzantium. The Palaiologos find a Constantinople partially ruined, a population impoverished, and walls requiring constant repairs. The latifundia, large estates, concentrate in the hands of powerful aristocrats, while the army remains understrength. On the geopolitical front, the Crusader states remain in the region, and external pressures are set to continue, or even intensify. The Ottomans, emerging from the Turkish Emirate of Osman, begin their expansion in Asia Minor, gradually gaining ground. But for now, the joy of this reconquest prevails. Constantinople has become Byzantine again, and the ghost of the Latin Empire evaporates into the annals of history. This episode, described as the Latin catastrophe and the interregnum in Nicaea, shows how much Byzantium's survival depended on contingent factors. The court's exile was marked by a fierce will to preserve authority, traditions, and the Orthodox religion. The emperors of Nicaea understood that patient diplomatic and military action was necessary to restore their capital. Less than 60 years after the sack of 1204, the Byzantine flag once again flew over the Golden Horn. The empire, although weak, showed its resilience before having to face new challenges, which would lead to its downfall under the Ottomans. In 1261, Michael VIII Palaiologos' victory celebrated the end of the Latin interlude and the renaissance, albeit brief, of Greek imperial power. The period extending from 1261 to 1453 constitutes the final chapter of the Byzantine Empire under the leadership of the Palaiologos dynasty. After the reconquest of Constantinople in 1261 by Michael VIII Palaiologos, the imperial state, which had been exiled in Nicaea since the Latin sack of 1204, reclaims its legendary capital. However, this victory is less glorious than it seems. Byzance's political and economic influence is already considerably diminished. The imperial territory is essentially limited to Thrace, located in southeastern Europe, and the despotate of Morea, on the Greek peninsula of Peloponnese. While the former Radiant Empire holds only a precarious control over certain islands in the Aegean Sea, the threat of new enemies looms on the borders. The Serbs, under the leadership of the kings and then czars of the Nemanjic dynasty, seek to extend their influence southward. The Catalans, whose famous Catalan company has already swept across Asia Minor in the early 14th century, continue to destabilize Byzantine possessions and pillage local resources. But even more serious, an emerging power, that of the Ottomans, will gradually develop in Anatolia. Soon, it will surpass its rivals to become the greatest threat to the empire. The restoration of Constantinople under Michael VIII, Palaiologos, quickly encounters multiple financial and diplomatic challenges. To consolidate his authority, the emperor attempts to negotiate with Western powers, notably with the Latin princes established in mainland Greece and the islands since the Fourth Crusade. He also seeks to conclude trade treaties with Italian cities, such as Venice and Genoa, which then dominate a portion of maritime exchanges in the eastern Mediterranean. However, these fragile alliances are not enough to restore the lost prosperity. The imperial treasury, already impoverished since the partial dismantling of the empire, struggles to cover the military and naval expenses necessary for maintaining imperial sovereignty. Fiscal pressure increases to finance an army that relies more and more on foreign mercenaries, which burdens the rural populations of Thrace and the Morea. On the religious front, Michael VIII envisions a rapprochement with Rome in order to obtain support against external threats. This prospect partially materializes with the Council of Lyon in 1274, where the emperor promises to submit the Byzantine Church to papal authority. However, the Byzantine population overwhelmingly rejects this agreement, perceived as a betrayal of Orthodox tradition. The contestation surrounding this religious union provokes local uprisings, particularly vigorous in the rural provinces attached to Orthodox rites. After the death of Michael VIII in 1282, his successor Andronic II Palaiologos reverses this rapprochement policy and condemns the union with Rome, seeking to appease the clergy and the population. However, the respite is short-lived. Military threats multiply, and the empire must cope with Serbian advances to the north, Catalan piracy in the Aegean Sea, and the expansionist appetites of the Latin princes, particularly in the region known as the Duchy of Athens. Additionally, the Ottoman presence in Asia Minor intensifies under the early sultans of the Ottoman dynasty, such as Osman Ferfer and Orhan, whose territories grow as the former Seljuk Emirates decline. To defend his possessions, Andronic II resorts to commercial capitulations, granting customs advantages to Venice or Genoa. He also hires mercenary companies, such as the Catalan Almogavres, to combat enemy incursions. Unfortunately, this dependence on external forces proves perilous. The mercenaries, underpaid, turn against the empire and seize strategic cities, aggravating the political and economic crisis. The Palaiologos dynasty then suffers from internal divisions, illustrated by the civil war between Andronic II and his grandson Andronic III around 1320-1328. These power struggles, which further weaken the empire, coincide with the emergence of new regional actors. Serbian princes continue their expansion, while in the south, in the islands and the Peloponnese, Latin lords consolidate their fiefs. Meanwhile, the Ottomans gradually extend their grip on cities in Asia Minor that were once Byzantine, such as Bursa and Izmit. At the regional level, the rivalry between Genoa and Venice for control of trade in the Aegean Sea reverberates on imperial policy, forcing Byzantium to grant numerous financial and port concessions to one or the other of these maritime powers. The weakened Byzantine Empire is occasionally able to forge temporary alliances to contain certain adversaries, but the absence of a strong regular army leaves it vulnerable. The few attempts to modernize the imperial fleet and calls for Western contingents invariably run into a lack of monetary means. Despite these vicissitudes, Constantinople remains a brilliant cultural center where Greek scholarship, Orthodox theology, and the arts are preserved in the scholarly circles of the court. The situation worsened during the 14th century, when the Black Death struck the entire Eurasian continent and decimated the population of the capital and the countryside. Furthermore, a series of civil wars undermined the stability of power. Emperor John V Palaiologos, who ascended to the throne in 1341, faced the ambitions of John VI Cantacuzene. The two men clashed for control of the imperial government, dragging along military leaders and provincial lords eager to place their interests above those of the empire. In this chaotic context, the Ottomans, now permanently established on the European side of the Bosporus, formed alliances with one or the other Byzantine faction, strengthening their position. By the end of the 14th century, Sultan Murad I, and then his successor, Bayezid, controlled vast territories in Thrace and Macedonia. Constantinople found itself increasingly encircled, forced to pay tribute to avoid direct assault. Meanwhile, the Serbian and Bulgarian empires collapsed under the Ottoman advance, depriving the Byzantine Empire of potential allies. The few Western supporters manifested themselves in the form of sporadic crusades, such as the one at Nicopolis in 1396, but these ended in bloody defeats. At the beginning of the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire was nothing more than a shadow of its former self. It mainly controlled the city of Constantinople and a few scattered enclaves in Greece, including the Despotate of Morea. Nevertheless, intellectual and artistic activity did not extinguish. Famous Byzantine thinkers, such as Gemistos Platon, advocated for a philosophical renaissance inspired by Plato, while other scholars continued to copy and preserve ancient Greek manuscripts. In hopes of rallying the West against the Ottoman threat, Emperor John VIII Palaiologos attended the Council of Florence in 1439, where he consented to a new attempt at union with the Church of Rome. This act was meant as a call for help, but it aroused fierce hostility among the population of the capital. Most Byzantines considered their orthodox values incompatible with papal primacy. As a result, the military support that John VIII hoped for proved to be very limited. The kings and princes of Western Europe, absorbed in their own conflicts, hesitated to commit substantial forces to aid the Second Rome. While Byzantine dignitaries were torn over the issue of religious union, the Ottomans, now led by Sultan Murad II, consolidated their positions and prepared for the total encirclement of Constantinople. Sultan Mehmed II, the son of Murad II, ascended to the Ottoman throne in 1451. Advocating a resolutely expansionist policy, he quickly concentrated his efforts on conquering the Byzantine capital. To prepare for the siege, he had the fortress of Rumeli Hisara, built on the European bank of the Bosporus, thereby controlling maritime traffic and cutting Constantinople off from any potential reinforcements coming from the Black Sea. Mehmed II also enlisted the services of a Hungarian engineer named Urban, renowned for his talent in crafting giant cannons. His artillery, unprecedented for the time, was transported to the vicinity of the Imperial city. When the siege began in April 1453, the walls of Constantinople, long deemed impregnable since antiquity, underwent incessant bombardment. The Byzantine Emperor, Constantine XV, Palaiologos, attempted to galvanize the defenders, composed of a few thousand Byzantine soldiers and an Italian contingent led by the Genoese captain Giovanni Justiniani. Despite heroic resistance, the numerical and material superiority of the Ottomans soon became apparent. On the morning of May 29, 1453, Mehmed II's troops launched the final assault. Urban's cannons opened breaches in the walls, allowing the Ottoman janissaries to infiltrate the city. The city fell under Ottoman domination, sealing the end of the Byzantine Empire. Constantine XV disappeared in the melee. A legend describes him transformed into a marble statue, awaiting the hour of his resurrection. Greek scholars and artists fled to the west, carrying manuscripts and knowledge that would nourish the Italian Renaissance. Mehmed II, now known as the Conqueror, settled in Constantinople, now Istanbul, and founded the modern Ottoman Empire.